Welcome to Davidtree's Love Who You Are podcast. If you're new to Davidtree, we certify meditation teachers and offer online courses in yoga for anxiety and teaching yoga to children. Davidtree's been a leader in the wellness industry for almost 30 years. I'm your host, Candice Lapointe. Join me as I connect with insightful guests who share the surprising places their meditation, yoga, and wellness journey have taken them. Navigating the human experience can feel perilous at times, but our guests share how embracing their radical uniqueness and applying self-compassion can change everything. Hi, welcome to the Love Who You Are podcast. I'm thrilled to be here with you now in this very moment, sharing our next episode featuring mindfulness practitioner and trainer, children's book author, and retired elementary school teacher, Sherry-Lynne Kirschner. The immediate outpouring of love for this community felt like a beautiful affirmation that we're all aligned in our unwavering passion to support people to be who they are and honor their unique path. And I'm including you in that circle, my friend. Thank you so much for being here. In this episode, Sherry-Lynne delves into her roots in education, her love for animals, and her mindfulness meditation practice, illustrating how all these elements have come together to help her lead her best life. Throughout our conversation, Sherry-Lynne shares stories from her travels, her father's meditation research with the HeartMath Institute, her own research, and how all of these experiences have had a profound impact on the way she's taught and engaged with the children in her classroom and community. We've all heard the saying, do what I say, not as I do. But Sherry-Lynne emphasizes that this notion should be reversed. As she explains, kids absorb what you live. They don't just hear what you say. How do you incorporate mindful moments into your daily routine? What practices can we lean on when we're struggling? This episode is rich with formal and unconventional practices that can be easily incorporated into your everyday life. Are you ready to discover techniques for regulating your emotions? Ready to learn how to distinguish between thought patterns that are helpful and thought patterns that aren't helpful? One standout moment for me was when Sherry-Lynne said, "Everyone makes mistakes. It's what we do afterwards that shapes our character." Whoa! Let's bring our focus to the present moment and soothe those amygdalas. Enjoy this episode. Hi, Sherry-Lynne. How are you?
I'm great. I'm super grateful to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm just so glad that you are here. I was just taken aback by an email that you had sent inquiry about getting a certificate from Davidtree,
yes.
Right? Like getting it reprinted or what have you. And
yes.
Just the way that you shared about your experience with Davidtree and the impact it's had on you. I was just like, oh, this person, I want to talk to them. I want to, share some space with you. And so thanks so much for coming on.
Words can't express the impact that participating in the training had on me. I mean, we're getting together with some of our Kula mates this weekend coming up, and we have been close since that time. They have such an incredible way of creating community, and I've never seen it in any other situation I've been in. And just Tamika and Carolyn, their wisdom, they're the voice in my head. It's incredible. And I just think of, because of that, how I've been able to touch so many different lives. It's overwhelming when I think about it. So I'm so deeply grateful. And when you asked, I said, for sure, because I just want to share that, is that I would just encourage anybody to do their training. It's life-changing.
Wow. So powerful, Sherry-Lynne, just like off the top, just, pouring out the love. And it really does feel good to hear all of those things and know that you're still meeting with your Kula mates.
Yes, I know. It's so great. They're some of my closest friends. It's just incredible. We have a really close relationship, and I'm so grateful. And we're all different ages, and we've seen each other through weddings and births and my retirement. And it's just from teaching, it's just incredible. I feel so blessed for those connections.
And it really is truly like nothing else, isn't it? Because you go through something, for sure. I know that we've mentioned this on other episodes too. It's like, it's really life-changing what you go through. And hey, you mentioned that you're retired.
Some people say I'm busier than I was when I was teaching, but no, it's just different. And I'm officially retired just before the pandemic. Actually, this was so strange. I got a concussion, and I tried to go back to school, and every time the kids would walk down the hallway, I would throw up. It was just, it was too much. And so anyway, I ended up retiring when I could officially retire, which is really interesting, in the February 2020, just before the pandemic. So we had this great big party in the gym. All the kids came, and then we had colleagues from years past. It was just such a great celebration. And then COVID happened. So it was interesting, very, very interesting. And then I had these opportunities to teach online and to deepen my practice. And it's just very serendipitous.
So it sounds like maybe the starting of your retirement kind of went off into a different direction, obviously, because of the pandemic.
Yes.
But you're such a celebrated woman, Sherry. Gosh. And then can you maybe take it a step back and talk to me a little bit more about how you knew that it was your time for retirement? Obviously, you had this concussion, but it's so interesting to me about how you said, like, I was going into the halls. Like, obviously, you might have been dealing with some symptoms and you were still kind of maybe pushing yourself to go to school and teach and do the things that you love. But then how did you make that call that you're like, this is maybe my time?
Well, it was the actual date. I was supposed to, I could retire in February 2020, but I hadn't planned to. I thought there wasn't any big plans to retire then, because I'm really grateful that my health is good now. I went through a period of time actually when I was doing my training when I wasn't very well, but then I got these multiple concussions. So I was off for a little bit of time to heal from the first one. And then I got the second one again, like just strange situations. And then I needed to take some time to really heal. And it just seemed to happen at that time. And I really think when I look back now, so much has happened in the different teaching that I do now, that it was really maybe time for a shift. I was doing at the end of my career in the classroom, I was teaching a lot of mindfulness to kids. I had a big yoga club, and I had a group called Share a Mindful Moment of teachers and psychologists, parents. We would meet once a month and share different mindfulness strategies that were working, celebrate them in different schools all around Thames Valley District School Board. And so I knew I wanted to teach, to continue that teaching, but I had no idea how it was going to manifest. And I got a call from Health Nexus at that time. I think it was in March, right after, and to do some work with children that have fetal alcohol syndrome. And so I started to design some programs that involved the books that I've written and started to teach online for them. And then we got some grants to do some in-person work. And we did that we integrated animals into the mindfulness practices. And so and then since then, this is our 4th year that we've been doing that. And we got 4 grants this year, and it's been wonderful. Now I'm teaching adults mindfulness meditation online, caregivers, and I have my online classes from kids all over Ontario. And then we teach in-person training at Circle R Ranch. We use horses and bunnies there.
Wow. Well, it feels like just such a full life that you're leading, and you're sharing your passions and being able to do the things that you love. Oh, I feel like I hear this a lot. It's like, I'm busier than I was when I was working now that I'm retired. But I think it's in all the good ways. Like you're truly embracing all of your passions and the things that you love doing and getting to do all of that while, still being busy. And it's good.
Every time we teach mindfulness to a group of kids, we always have an information session to parents just to give them an idea of what is the neurobiology. Like when we're jumping around doing all this mindful movement, there is a method to the madness. So we give them the background. And one of the parents had asked me, what are you doing now? And I noticed as I was explaining it, I stopped myself and said, I'm really living my best life. I'm just so deeply grateful. And all of the things that I thought I didn't know, I remember sitting with Tamika after my training and really deciding which direction that I was going to go. And when we were talking at that time, it's like she could see it, but I couldn't really see it. And she kept telling me, just trust the process. And now I look back, I look now and I think, my gosh, this is all what I had hoped to be able to teach kids locally in person, to be able to teach kids. I was able to travel, and my family were in China and Malaysia. I was able to do some teaching there. And it's just, I've been really, really grateful. Yet I do find I have to take time each day, because I can work really hard. I have no problem with that. But I do really culture my practice and cultivate my practice every day. I start every morning with meditation, and then I have goats. And so when I milk my goat, Faith, I sit and spend some time with her just so I can really walk my talk. I think it's really important to do that. And whenever anybody asks me, how do I teach my child to be more mindful or my class to be more mindful, I say we always start with ourselves first. It's the most important thing.
Well, it certainly sounds like mindfulness has been a vein throughout your life, and teaching children in the classroom and then obviously outside of the classroom too. So can you take us back to your teaching days and then how you integrated your mindfulness practice into the classroom and to the parents and supporting caregivers and others who were interested in these practices?
Yeah. So I think it was back in around 2006. I took a sabbatical in 2008 to do research on mindfulness. I wasn't well, and so I took some period of time away to heal. I took a year off. My mom was a principal of a school in Macau, China at the time, so I took my kids over to China, and I actually taught for her in the summertime and spent some time there. And I was really impacted. I remember taking a taxi to the school one day, and I watched some kids waiting for their bus, and they were doing all of these mindful movements, like these things where they were crossing the midline of the body. At that time, I was teaching this grade 7 class, and I had said to the kids, "What are you doing?" I was just asking them. And they were talking about getting their bodies and their brains and their hearts ready to learn. And I remember that really impacted me. I thought, wow, I wanted to learn more about this. And then my dad has taught meditation for many, many years. And we started to share practices, mindfulness meditation practices. He taught all kinds of different types of meditation and just really resonated with me deeply. And we started to he was doing some work for the HeartMath Institute at that time. And so he shared his research, and we would have this time where we would talk about different practices that might impact a child's learning. And I remember him introducing me to this one resource that was called Teach Only Love. And it was from the HeartMath Institute, and it talked about doing a heart lock-in with kids. And I remember doing that meditation with my grade 6 class, and it was very light, but there was such a profound impact on the energy field in the classroom. I remember thinking, wow, there's really something to this. And at the time, I remember I was, so I had a grade 6 class, and I was teaching Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim was the book. And so my colleague and I decided I decided I was going to bring rats into the classroom and rats and mice and compare them. And so that was kind of the first time that we integrated the practice of being really quiet and mindful for the animals in our classroom. And I think that was the first step to integrating the practice with animals. And it turned out to be an incredible experience. And then it just developed from there. When I started to do a lot of research in 2008, it really started. There wasn't a lot of research there. Well, I think I remember there were 6 studies with kids. Now there's thousands and thousands of studies. And there was a lot of fear. I do remember when I started to bring the teachings into the classroom, I remember a few parents saying, are you trying to make my child Buddhist? And I had a really great principal at the time, and he found all of this research on yoga in the classroom. And so we started to do mindful movement. I still have videos from way back then that I had a really amazing staff to work with. They're so supportive. And we did a lot of trying things out together. And then I created a curriculum called Attention in Action. And then I shared that with colleagues that might be interested. And it involved the basic components of mindfulness practice. There was always a mindful movement section. We had a brain basics. We talked about the different parts of the brain and how they impact how we feel throughout the day, like Amy amygdala. When Amy amygdala is firing, what happens to us, why we might feel that way. And then we called it chillaxin, where we did visualizations and relaxations. And we did super senses, which were sensory activities, nurture nature, where we would go outside every day. And we just did some mindful walking. Even if it was 10 minutes of the day, we did snoga outside. So all of these, and then I had a yoga club, and it just seemed to develop from then. And then seemed to be a lot of interest in our board of teachers that they knew that it could have an impact on the kids' learning.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it just kind of grew from there. And then I gave workshops for the board, and
well,
yes,
just
so
such an
much.
interesting point that you had mentioned. I want to hear more about this heart locking meditation. And then secondly, I want to know more about, oh gosh, where was I going with this? Um, walking your talk. Like, I think that this is such an interesting concept too, because I feel like we can do all of the teaching and the preaching and everything, and then how to integrate that into our own daily lives and ensure that we're walking our talk. So
I used to have a practice every day when I walked into the classroom that I would smack the door jamb when I walked before I entered my classroom. And it was more to check if I was present. You get bustling, and I had young kids, and, just like that busyness. And the role of an educator, there's just so much. And I see that. And that's why I feel so grateful to be able to work with other teachers. I'm piloting a program. I can talk about that in a little bit, a mindfulness curriculum that I've written to go with the books. But wow. I find it really, it's so important, because kids get what you live. They don't get what you say. And so I always found that if I was struggling and I came into the classroom, the kids pick up on it right away. And so and sometimes I would often say to the kids, I'm really not in a great place today. Like, I'm going to need some help. I was really late last night. I maybe just be really authentic with them. And 9 times out of 10, unless they're really struggling too, there would be that compassion. And I think it's so deeply important. I know, really, I used to sit in the staff room in February, and I'd look around the staff room table and everybody's so tired. It's like that compassion exhaustion. And if I didn't take time to cultivate that, even just moments a day, and like all your informal practices, like washing your hair in a different order, like, just some things to give your brain a bump. And then the formal practices, I mean, they've just given me I'm so deeply grateful for my practice. I'm so grateful to be able to have strategies that I can watch these emotions when I'm struggling and say, okay, now I need to take care of myself because I'm really struggling right now. And there's that breath between lacking the capacity to hold on to the emotion and then unconsciously projecting it onto somebody else. And usually it's our loved ones, because we know they love us unconditionally, right? And so I'm really grateful for the learning that's come with that.
That's huge, Sherry-Lynne, because I think I'm kind of, just as you were saying that, I'm like, oh man, I think this is exactly what I'm experiencing, right? Like, I was just talking to Carolyn the other day about my morning experiences, and as a mom, getting everybody together and out the door for school and daycare, and how those transitions can be very difficult, right? And especially if you've got schedules that you're trying to meet and timelines, and knowing that you're right, our children pick up on how we're feeling and how we're reacting and acting. I notice these shifts too. It's like when I am aware of the emotions that I'm feeling, and I can calm myself and take a deep breath and be mindful about how I'm going about my morning and my day, it just seems to have such a great impact on my children, and the ease of which all of the things that we have to do before we get out the door can occur. Yes. So it just has such a ripple effect, right? All of these practices.
And definitely. And what it's helped me is really to become aware of thought patterns that are helpful and thought patterns that are not helpful, to recognize those. Through my practice, I've noticed I have this voice in my head that can be very demanding and very hard on myself. And I watch it and I think, wow, right now these ratios are high, where the bar is set so high. Even the learning of this striving for perfectionism is like a form of anxiety. Like, that learning was just monumental for me. So it allows me to kind of take a breath and say to myself, you know what, you're trying the best that you can with what you have in this moment, and that is enough. And I used to write that in signs all over in my car, on my mirror, in the bathroom, like, you're trying your very best. And it's okay not to be okay and have all the answers. I used to
Right.
do that in the classroom all the time. Kids would say to me, they'd ask a question. I'm like, that's a really good question. I really don't know, but I am going to try to find an answer for you tomorrow.
So good to be honest with them about not knowing the answer and that you're going to look for it, right?
Yeah.
And try
Yeah.
and answer it for them. How do you get to that spot where you are able to take notice and reflect? Like you're saying, oh, I'm realizing all of this self-talk or like my negative self-talk or patterns that I have. I'm wondering for folks out there, how do you get to a spot where you have the ability to take a step back without spiraling? I have a feeling like it's obviously practice and constant navigation of it, but I'm just curious if you have some immediate steps on like when I'm feeling this, how can I take a step back to notice?
It's grounded in the practice. I remember many years ago, I went to this mindfulness and education conference down at the Omega Center in Rhinebeck, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And John Kabat-Zinn was the guest to introduce. And he stood up at the front and he said, you sit as though your life depended on it, because it does. And that was so impacting to me, because I thought, wow, it changes. It's so important that it changes the nature of the day, like how everything goes. My dad has talked to me and cultivated my practice deeper and deeper and deeper. I'm so very grateful for that. And he talks about ratios of time. And as our practice deepens, what I have noticed is that the ratios of time that I spend with the easier emotions, like gratitude and joy and happiness, those increase in time. So when these difficult emotions, and often we tell the kids we're not bad emotions. These emotions just come and visit our heart and they give us something to learn. And then they go on their way and they'll leave. We always say, they're going to leave, but so will happiness and joy. So that's why we need to be really particular when we see them. But it's a great understanding that we do have strategies that can shift. Like the other night online, I was saying to the kids, we play this game called Near Far Sounds. And so we just sit and we say, okay, so now I want you to point to the sound that is the farthest away that you can hear. Now, is it made by a machine, or is it made by a person or an animal? And so we extend their sense of hearing. And then we bring it, okay, now we're going to come back inside the room and we're going to listen to sounds that are close to us. And this game I've watched, we've been in an assembly of 350 kids, and instantly it goes dead quiet. And the parents will say, wow, what did you do? I said, it's the practice. It's the teaching them the practice. It's the power in the practice. But we know when we start to work with that prefrontal cortex of the brain, we can create new pathways just by doing something as simple as that, focusing on the senses. We can tell kids to go for a color walk, pick your favorite. And I do this when I am struggling. If I'm driving down the road, sometimes I'll teach the kids a marmot breath, which is just breathing in and then screaming at the top of your lungs. And I do that in the car sometimes just to let it out. It's like, okay, I'm not going to hurt anybody. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I just need to process this frustration. But a color walk is a great thing. It's just when you're walking. And I do this all the time. If I'm really struggling, I'll say, okay, blue. And I look for all the things that are blue. And what it's doing, we know through research, is we know that it's bringing your awareness to the present moment. And it's calming that amygdala, that emotional part of the brain, the limbic system. And then not making any big decisions, because Poindexter, the PFC that we call him, that we teach the kids, that when Amy amygdala is shouting, we can't make good decisions. She can't get through to Poindexter, the PFC. And so we teach them this. But it's been such a great learning for me and for the parents that I work with and teachers that I work with, because it's a basic understanding of the way that our brain works. And then we can make really conscious choices that can help us navigate our emotions with more grace.
Right. So it's like more or less a explanation about perhaps what could be going on inside of you and why you might be feeling the things, and then how to navigate that. That could be a very good connection for people to move through their emotions, for sure.
Like the power of gratitude. You think we've heard this again and again and again, but it's doing it. It's like that Nike, just do it. Even when that ego mind is telling you, oh, it's not going to work. Oh, don't do it. It's not worth it. And if you can just say to that part of you and say, I'm just going to go through the process. I'm going to fake it till I make it, and just look around and look at all the things that you're grateful for. Because we know the brain starts to release serotonin. We hug an animal, releases oxytocin. A lot of the times if I'm struggling, I'll just sit with my dog. And we've made up all of these sensory walks and things that we can do with our pets at home to release oxytocin, because we know that oxytocin has a profound impact on the way that you're feeling in the moment.
There's so many tools all around us, and it feels like they're all right there. It's remembering. I've had this conversation with girlfriends too. It's like in that moment when you're feeling heightened and you have all of these emotions coming through, in that moment, how to be able to say, hey, oh yeah, this tool in my toolkit, I struggle with that so much.
Well, and we really focus on when we're teaching parents to work with their kids. Like I remember this one parent said, like she was standing at the checkout at Walmart, and I thought, oh, God love you. And her daughter wanted this and started to have this major meltdown. And she said, I was trying to get her to do volcano breaths. And I'm like, that is not like so amazing. Like kudos to the mom for doing that. But we know, and we'll teach people, it's not the actual outburst, it's the recovery period. So we want to decrease the length of that recovery period. And the way we do that is to practice away from the emotional outburst, away from the limbic system firing. So we have to create the neural integration. When we're teaching kids outside, we'll take them through a part of the forest where there's no path, and we'll walk them through, and they're like, and I said, like, this is what happens when we're trying something new. And then I'll take them to a big, like a driveway, and I'll say, this is what happens when we've practiced. And this is why we can recover so much faster when we have spent the time practicing. And so and so a lot of the times, like parents originally come to me and they'll say, that my child had this incredible outburst. And I say, okay, it's great to be aware of the outbursts, but I want to track the amount of time that it took for them to come back to you. And we talk about this strategy of there you are, when you get to see your child's heart after they've come through it. And then it's just praise, 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 because they've done so much incredible work, right? It's like the brain has worked so hard to come back to the present moment. And so we want to really encourage that, so that most kids, after they have these emotional outbursts, there's this feeling that they feel bad inside about themselves, right? And we always say, everybody makes mistakes. It's what we do afterwards that shapes our character. Anybody that's been taught by me can say that. My own kids will. They know that. It's like what we do afterwards, and what strategies can we set in place so that that period becomes shorter. As I've worked with kids where it's like 5 days before they come back to the present moment. And like, you can't imagine how people could probably imagine how exhausting that would be.
This gives me so much hope, right? Because I think that, wow, what is this all going to look like when the kids that we're teaching right now and that are moving through all of this mindful exercises, what they're going to be like when they're adults and they're moving through these big emotions, and how they're all going to, grapple with everything. It gives me a lot of hope.
And a lot of the times I'll hear, because people are pushed and stretched to their limit, and then when the soul is experiencing that, then it gets to see things that don't carry as much light. And I'll hear conversations from people saying, oh, there's so many kids that are struggling right now. But I really see it as there's so much more awareness. And when I wrote my first book on Marvin the Mindful Marmot, and I asked in the book, I write, my very favorite question is, what do you notice? And I say to kids, oh, I'll ask you this question 45,000 times. And kids will say, oh, Mrs. K, that's your favorite question. But in the book, I wrote, we asked Marvin, what's going on? What do you notice? And he goes, nothing. And I thought it was fashioned at that period of time. So often I would ask kids, like, let's rub our hands as fast as you can and place them on your cheek. What do you notice? And a lot of the kids would say nothing. And I thought, we have in education taught from the shoulders up, and that's been the focus. And so now I see, in the fall, we gave a 2-day workshop to teens out at Circular Ranch, and we gave all the kids a bunny in their lap. It was so precious because it just allowed them to soften and come to the present moment. And I put up a poster that said overwhelm and anxiety. And I said, can you tell me what this feels like, looks like, sounds like? What does overwhelm feel like in your body? And These kids talked for 20 minutes. I could not write as fast as they could articulate what overwhelm feels like in their body. And I thought, wow, like
That's
this is
huge.
massive, massive.
Mhm.
Then I brought up a poster that said self-compassion. Crickets. It was like, and this one girl's precious soul, she goes, isn't that amazing that we have such an intimate relationship with anxiety and overwhelm, and we can't even say what a self-compassion means. Like, we can't even say that. But for me, I thought, okay, this is where our work is now. I was just so inspired because I thought, wow, they could tell me that their heart was beating, that they felt cold, that parts of their body, their lower back was sore, like this intimate relationship with their bodily functions. And like, that's just incredible.
Right.
So then, okay, that's our starting point now. We don't have to teach that now. So now we can move on. We can say, okay, now, when we want to teach compassion, I said to them, who's your best friend? Tell me about your bestie. And I said, okay, would you ever talk to your best friend like your mind talks to you sometime? Like, no. And I said, well, what if it was like you're speaking to your best friend? How would you talk? So it's like these little simple practices now, but it's just giving them strategies that they can relate to.
Right.
Yeah.
This is so important, Sherry-Lynne, because I think too, while you're speaking, obviously you work alongside children a lot of the times. And I know that you've mentioned you talk to and teach caregivers and parents and teachers. Yes. And I'm hearing this, like, all the things that you are sharing with children just obviously could be applied to adults as well. Little nuggets and lessons as you're talking. I'm just like, oh yeah, this is for me too. All of these things, right?
One of the things we say all the time to the kids is be kind to yourself, be gentle to yourself. And often when I've had adult groups, they'll say their child articulating that and saying that, like before they're doing these like butterfly taps before they go to bed. And they'll say, but I know I need to be kind to myself. And some of the parents have said, wow, like that, I need to hear that, because I don't meet bad parents. I meet people that are trying their very, very best and have exhausted the strategies in their toolbox, and they just need more tools in their toolbox. They're caring. The majority of parents, they're just tired and overwhelmed and inundated by social media and comparison. You know, I one of my big teachings to parents, and this is what I remind myself all the time too, is that comparison breeds suffering. And through social media, it's very, very difficult.
Totally. I think that that's just it, right? It's like the exhaustion of knowing the right way of going about doing everything, and then that self-compassion piece for when things aren't going the way that you think that they should be going. I maybe should be speaking from the I. It's like, okay, I know that this is how I should be navigating a situation, but I yelled, or I, got really upset about being late for something, or, my child wanting to wear a certain pair of pants versus the ones that we had picked out the night before in preparation. And you know what I mean? All the things. And it's like, it's so difficult to navigate this world as a parent with children too, for sure.
Oh, definitely. I think now, like, I look at the way that I wish I would have known these strategies back when my kids were growing up. Like, I feel like I want to apologize to my kids all the time and think, I know I tried my best. But I wish I would have known then what I know now.
Are you interested in uncovering a freer, more playful side of yourself and studying a new branch of yoga at the same time? If you felt stagnant or stuck in your yoga teachings or your own practice, our HeartRise Children's Yoga Teacher Training will help you break through and uncover an original source of joy. This course brings creativity into your life and will revolutionize your relationships with children and youth. HeartRise was designed by experienced therapists and yoga educators and has helped hundreds of people transform their practice and teachings. To experience this transformative online course, head to davitree.com, www.devatree.com. See you there.
Yeah, it's information.
Can you talk a little bit more about your relationship with your father? You mentioned that he's a meditation teacher. And so I'm curious, now that we're talking about this parenting, stuffs,
Yes.
What was it like growing up with a dad that was a meditation teacher? And did you learn some of these mindful pieces already, or did that come later on in life?
Yes, that definitely came later on in life. My dad has developed a deep meditation practice. Him and his my stepmom is his wife, and has just really shared the energy field around both of them is pretty incredible. And I know that when I simply walk into their presence, I'm shifted, and I'm deeply grateful for that. He's done a lot of work in sound meditation. He ran groups for many years, on meditation groups that lasted for many, many years. And he was an educator. He worked for OISE, the Ontario Institute for Education and Education. And so he brought practices into schools for a period of time. And then he left that and formed his own business, and then continued to deepen his practice. He and his wife, they owned this center where they ran meditation classes out of there. And it just really taught me so much, and really helped me shift who I am. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful for that. My parents are both educators, and my mom taught for 53 years.
Wow.
Yes, she's an incredible educator. She retired from teaching here and then went to China and was a principal at a school for the arts for 16 years afterwards.
Oh, wow.
And we had a joke that she finally retired just before I retired. And we said that she said she needed to retire before I retired. But so I'm super grateful to be able to have learned from both of them different things. All of my mom's input as an educator, and how kids learn, and how to inspire kids and bring them out and help them focus. And then my dad's practice, like the way that he lives his life. And he's a lifelong learner. They're always learning and being excited about learning also. So I'm super grateful. I'm very, very grateful.
That's amazing. I think that maybe too, when you get older, just being able to reflect on the impact that your parents have had, it's just so amazing to hear about the different things that you've taken from each of them. Again, putting that into your tool belt and your toolkit.
Yes.
And that's so amazing.
Yeah.
You've talked about working with different populations now. And can you share a little bit more about your work? I know that you mentioned that you've gotten funding from different governments or organizations. And so could you share a little bit more about that work?
Yeah. So I am a service provider for Health Nexus.
Okay.
And I was really super grateful to be able to get Angela Geddes, a friend of mine, put me in contact with them many years ago, just after I retired. So Health Nexus is an organization it's a nonprofit organization that provides health services primarily. Well, one part of their work that they do is with neurodivergent children, and primarily fetal alcohol syndrome, kids that have fetal alcohol syndrome. And so originally, that's how I got my first contract. And I was teaching, using my books, Marvin the Mindful Marmot, to teach kids mindfulness online. And then it blossomed into, I put some proposals into working with animals. And then we got funding for a 9 to 12-year-olds to bring them to Circle R Ranch and to teach them in person. And I created a program that integrates mindfulness training with animals. And I work with Joan Russell out at Circle R Ranch, and super grateful for the staff there and for her. She's been an integral part in the development of a lot of work that we do together. And since then, I've had a contract to work with teens. And recently we just did a caregiver retreat there, where it was really lovely. They funded so that I could teach the caregivers mindfulness meditation online for a series of nights in preparation for a full day retreat. And so we did some work, actually some of my dad's research on success story work through his therapy. We did that in the morning in the lodge. And then in the afternoon, we worked with the rabbits and the horses, and then ended the day with, all the food was provided. It was just a beautiful day for caregivers. And some of those caregivers applied to be part of this online course that we're doing right now through Health Nexus. So right now I teach on Monday nights from 5:30 to 6:30, I teach 4 to 8-year-olds, and then 9 to 12-year-olds. I think there's some 14-year-old kids from 7 to 8 on Monday nights. And then Wednesday nights, I teach the caregiver class from 7 to 8:30 online. So they funded all of that. Yeah. And we've had so many applications. Like it is just a reflection of the time right now. There are just so many needy families. The beauty of teaching online is that we can, I mean, it's really lovely to hear where, oh, I'm in Kapuskasing, or I'm here from Timmins, and it's lovely when the kids are saying, what's the weather like where you are? It's really sweet. And some of the kids, I mean, from far away, like last year, we had some kids that were part of the online program came to the in-person program and drove from like Barrie, like 4 hours to come to the in-person program because they received funding too. So it's lovely to be able to have this funding because there are just so many needy families right now.
Well, and I think too, Sherry-Lynne, that it just speaks volumes about your impact and how everyone is gravitating towards you. I'm sure that just your wisdom and everything that you're sharing is just spoken in such high regard, because just from what I'm hearing you say, it sounds like just such a blessing and a gift to have you doing the work that you're doing. And I know that all of the families are just receiving so much amazing support and wisdom from you. So that's,
Well, thank you. But I always feel like the other night we shared what's your intention in coming to the course. And I always share that my intention is to learn, because I learn so much. We have a time to share with the adults. I always have some nights where we just have open time where they can come and share questions or concerns. And also they share, like I say, what's your definition of mindfulness today? Like, what does that mean to you? And how is your practice helping you? And it's just, you just hear strategies and you hear, and it really, really helps my compassion. Also, often it gives me perspective. I just hear, the other night when people were introducing themselves, our first night, I signed off and I was like, wow, these people are warriors. Like they just inspire me so much. And I think, and it really helps me put things in perspective. So when the water buckets are frozen and I have to carry water for a while, it's like, okay, this is my biggest challenge today. It's such I'm very blessed and I feel privileged to be able to do this work. Really.
Just the story sharing and how healing it can be, right? It's just amazing. You are experiencing such profound healing just by others sharing too and coming together. It's so impactful.
Vulnerability is humbling. And I'm always so deeply grateful for the first person that goes deep, because then there's always a shift. Especially when you're working with teens, I'm always so grateful to that first person that said, well, I'm here because I'm anxious and I can't feel comfortable. I can never feel comfortable. And then it just kind of ripples through the group. Like it just opens the heart. And then people share with such authenticity, which is a privilege to be in the privilege, like in the present.
It's like this, almost the safety piece, right? It's like, oh, I am among people that are maybe experiencing the same sorts of things that I've gone through. And I think that that's just it, right? Is if we take a step back, we realize that everyone goes through these emotions and these feelings. And so it's just that reminder, that comparison reminder is that nobody is above us. Nobody is what somebody might be looking like they're experiencing and all the successes that they're having. We don't know necessarily the steps that it took for them to get there, or, their struggles and the things that they're even dealing with at that current moment. So it is such a good reminder. And I think, just that safety piece of being like you said, you're so grateful that there's people that are willing to be vulnerable and just allow that to kind of break open and have others be vulnerable and share as well. Because there's so much learning that can come about when people are vulnerable and want to share. It's amazing.
I know I use a lot of Kristen Neff's work, her self-compassion work. I just love her as a teacher. And oftentimes we'll do that self-compassion break, where you notice that the situation is challenging. And often with the older kids, we'll say, we just look at the situation and say, this sucks. Like, this is really, really difficult right now. But the second step is always, I am not alone. I am not alone in my suffering. And I think that that's such a powerful step to say, other people are suffering and other people are in maybe not the exact same situation, but the emotional effect on the body is the same. And I think that's really powerful to recognize. And then the third step is sending ourselves kindness. Like, may I be filled with loving kindness. May I feel safe. all of these loving kindness statements that flood our body with these neurochemicals that can help us shift the emotion quickly. But it's great practice.
Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit more about this? You mentioned, is it success story sharing or research?
Yes.
Can you share a little bit more about that?
That's my dad's work.
Okay.
Yeah, it's his work.
Yeah.
So the exercise, actually, it's really kind of cool because I pair this when I teach this in workshops. I always pair it with that mindful listening exercise that we learned with Devotry.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody shares and you hold space for that person and they share for the entire time without any interrupting.
Mm-hmm.
And we practice holding space. And then we say, this is what I heard you say. Did I get that right? That whole thing. So
Yes.
So I always introduce this work when I work with adults, and I've done it with kids too, older kids. But the idea is, and so it's based on my dad's research, is for many years he worked with his clients where he would have them bring success stories. So, and the success story doesn't have to be like I'll say to people, I used to own a summer camp and we had lots of staff that used our washing machine and dryer, and I always had all these extra socks. And so one of my success stories was one day I paired up all the socks. So it was like this feeling of, it doesn't have to be like off the charts,
Mm-hmm.
but it could be like when I published my first book and I was holding it in my hands, it was like these feelings that I felt.
Mm-hmm.
So what he's done is he gets people to share these success stories. And as they do that, they are living certain qualities. And so let's say, for example, the sock example. Well, maybe through that, I was living perseverance, for example, or focus or tenacity to be able to. And so then as they talk about their success story, the person who's listening, and this is what he did and is like a master at doing, is jotting down, pulling all of these qualities that you're living while you have achieved these successes. And then he called these soul qualities. And so they could be really helpful in your direction of where you want to go in your life. Or even when you're in a situation that's challenging, like, okay, if compassion is one of your soul qualities, and this is what, when you're successful, you demonstrate deep compassion, and you're struggling because this little guy in your class, for example, is having a hard day, you can say, not judgmental on yourself, but am I showing my soul qualities right now? Or if you need to make a big decision in your life in the direction that you want to go, would this work, for example, honor these qualities that are super important to me and are part of me? So it's wonderful he used a lot of it in his work to help people choose like different life paths. And if they were resonant, like if they were really like a great direction to take, because they'd shown so much in these, what they deemed as a success story. And then also he's really, really great at seeing what people live, like what you live. So I've taken that work, which I find so incredibly inspiring, and it's helped me really with my direction. And then I've created a program at Circle R where it's called the Living Qualities Program. And so we'll say, okay, if we know that it's really helpful to be able to be confident in the classroom or in life, when we lead this horse now, how can we live this quality of confidence? Mm-hmm. So if we're working with a child that's really struggling with self-esteem, I'll say, well, what does that look like? If I want to move this 2,000-pound animal, and if I'm wishy-washy, this guy's not going to move. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean to live this quality? So his research has really informed a lot of the work that I do with all of the work that I do with kids.
This is amazing. That's so amazing. I'm inspired. I kind of wanted to go through this success story research. Like, hey, I think I could do some of that. I was going to ask more too, Sherry-Lynne, about your books. And I know that you've mentioned them a couple of times here. But they're just so amazing. And so I know on your website, so Mindful Me is your business, and people can find you online, I think at mindfulme.ca. Yeah. Yep. And they can learn about Marvin.
Yes,
I was just so curious about him because I think there's a little video or synopsis about your inspiration behind the books and the characters. And can you tell the audience a little bit more about that? I just find it so interesting. Yeah.
So I was teaching grade 4 at the time, and the kids in my class, we were practicing mindfulness every day. We had 20 minutes of mindfulness, and one of the kids said, Mrs. K, we need a champion of mindfulness. We need an animal that's going to teach kids about mindfulness. And I was sitting, and so we were giving it some thought, and I was sitting with my friend Tracy Bradshaw one weekend, and we came up with the name Marvin because that means friend. And then we were going, Marvin the moose, Marvin the mouse. And then she said, how about a marmot? And I said, what's a marmot? And she said, these little funny little furry creatures that she saw when she was traveling out west. And then I talked to my sister, Paula, and she is a biologist out west. She looks after the whales a lot. She works for Transport Canada. And she has a lot of background in the endangered species of Canada. And she says, well, Cher, the Vancouver Island marmot is the most endangered species in Canada. Wow. At one point, there was only 30 at one time. Here, I'll show you. So this is what Marvin looks like.
There's Marvin.
We just so love him. And so like from there, we said, okay. And so then these are all the mindful mates. So all of these are endangered species. So when I wrote the story, I thought it might be kind of cool to honor the endangered species of Canada. And so we gave them all different, like Sassy is a little Pacific water shrew, and Bernie the burrowing owl. And then I took the main tenets of mindfulness practice that I wanted to teach and then integrated into the story. So the first one, Marvin the Mindful Marmot, is all about the body and the breath. So he learns. So the funny thing is when marmots are startled, they whistle. That's why they're called whistle pigs. And so he has a hard time because when he's scared, he loses control and he whistles, and it's all just whistles. So he goes to see Granny Marmot with his friends, and she teaches him how to do a body scan, really. But he farts during it. And there's some funny, because when we were writing the story, it was so funny. So we wrote the story together. I said, okay, well, we write the story. And the first draft we took to another classroom, and the kids were like, that's boring. That's boring.
Some honest feedback. Right?
It was so funny. And they're like walking back. And so then they said, well, why don't we make him fart? That was one of the kids. And they said, okay, we need to make him laugh. And then we used to have mindfulness assemblies once a month, and we always introduced different breaths to bring everybody to focus. And one of the breaths that was really popular at our school was the conductor breath. So it's like if you have a baton, somebody would stand up in front of the whole school, and if they brought their baton up, they would breathe in, and when they bring their baton down, you exhale, and you have to hold your breath when you go sideways. So the kids love that because it's like this little bit of control of 350 people. So then we added that into the story too. And then that's just how the second one is all about mindful eating. And so it was the super senses, like the sensory awareness. He learns how to slow down. And then this last one really came out of, so I just published this last one just before Christmas. And it came out of all the work that I've done with Health Nexus, because I would say probably, a good percentage of the requests for help come because their child is experiencing anxiety. And that has really become so much more prevalent in the applications since COVID. Wow. So Marvin goes to camp. And actually, one of the characters, Spindle, is fashioned after Joan Russell at Circle R Ranch. It's an indigenous pony. And we even fashioned the character so it looks like her with her pink hat and her braids. That's the horse. I dedicated that book to Circle R Ranch for all the work and the incredible staff there.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on as to why you feel like anxiety is becoming more prevalent in children or even in adults too? Like we're seeing a lot more diagnoses.
I think there's more awareness of what anxiety is, like it's that on a spectrum. It's kind of like 30 years ago when I first started teaching in the way that we would define autism and how it's changed now to a spectrum. And I think anxiety, I kind of look at it the same way, where there's just a greater awareness of panic attacks. This is what's actually happening to me right now. People can articulate it. There's a lot more information, and not that the information is driving it, but I think there has been a lot of people experiencing anxiety throughout their life. And now there's help and strategies that you can find on Instagram, for example. And can't say enough about how challenging life is right now when we look at the state of the world, and that's fed through social media and the news. And it's just a call to these practices. There are strategies like we can teach little ones. One of the things that I'm asked a lot is, how can I help my child go to bed? And making that transition to sleep is very, very challenging. I love Dr. Gordon Neufield's work with that. He has a beautiful talk on YouTube I always recommend to the parents in my classes. And he talks about the separation of when kids go to bed. And that's why anxiety can be heightened, because they don't want to be away from the person who loves them unconditionally. Yeah, so I think we see that a lot more. And I think people have a vocabulary to work with. I think when I first started to teach mindfulness, that's one of the things that I really noticed, is that kids lacked the vocabulary. And I used to write it up all the time. I used to write everything they said. Who feels tingly? Who feels tight in their chest? Whose chest feels heavy? Just these words, helping them develop this range of vocabulary to be able to express what's going on inside them. And emotions. Like a lot of kids that really struggle with neural integration, we'll see they have happy, sad, mad. Brene Brown's research, this book that she's written called Atlas from the Heart, or Atlas of the Heart.
The heart, I believe. Yeah.
If people can comment on 3 emotions visiting, they can name 3 emotions visiting: happy, sad, and pissed off. And I found that when I read that, I just burst right out laughing. I thought, now isn't that so true? What does disappointment feel like? What is resentment, and what does it feel like in the body? So it's like really developing this depth of capacity to express ourselves. And I think that that's contributed to it.
I just had this like flashback to a memory of, I don't know exactly what the situation was, but I remember talking to Tamika and saying that my daughter Rhea said she felt embarrassed, and she might have been maybe 3 or 4 years old. And Tamika said to me, wow, isn't that amazing to be that young and say she understands what embarrassment feels like? Yeah. So anyways, just so interesting that, yes, we're getting the vocabulary now to then pass on to the younger generations to then be able to express how they're feeling, right? And what they're going through. It's amazing.
And there's so much more research out there now to see, so we can teach kids the impact of these emotions on their body. Dr. David Hawkins, his work on Power versus Force, if you've ever read that, it's an amazing book.
I haven't.
He maps out consciousness, levels of consciousness. And we taught these to kids in our school, where kids can recognize that shame is can be one of the lowest levels of emotion. And so, and often there's this gradient, and there's like shame, sadness, pride, and then courage, love, unconditional love, bliss, peace. In the middle, there's neutrality. But we can teach these, and they can be super helpful, because kids can understand why when they feel angry, it's actually they're on their way up this ladder. We call it about that. In my next book, I've written a book to use for this curriculum in the schools that I'm piloting right now. And it's an activity book, but it talks about the ladders of emotion and the steps of emotion. And it can help parents. And I often tell parents this: if a child is experiencing a lot of shame, which is so difficult on the body, there's so many neurochemicals that are released. When we see this shift to anger, it's something positive. It's something positive. Now, it may be difficult to hold, and we grow our capacity to be able to like, oh, great, now they're throwing things around. But I often give the example. I remember one year I was teaching grade 6, and I had this child that was really, really, really struggling. And he would come in every day, and he'd put his hoodie over his head, and he'd put his head down on his desk. This happened for weeks. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to help this child? And then I had this student teacher come, and she was so precious, and she was young and zipping around my classroom. And you could tell her she was just kind of flitting around him, and her energy was impacting him. And I was sitting back watching this, and I thought, oh, I wonder what's going to happen. Well, one day he got up and he threw his desk, and you could see her face was like this horror stricken. And I'm like, yes, I'm so glad. Like, I can work with this. This anger, it's outward, right? We can work with that emotion. When it's all inward, so difficult. But it helps us understand emotion. and how specifically target strategies to work with them.
This is amazing. Sherry-Lynne, you are such a gift to the world. And through this whole conversation, it's like I'm banking things here too about the wisdom and different tools that you're sharing. And so I know that everyone that's listening and watching are going to walk away with a bunch of these nuggets as well. So I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you've shared today about mindfulness and your work with children and animals. And just, again, you're such a light to this world. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I mean, this has just been a lovely opportunity for me to share, and to hang out with you has been such a joy. Thank you.
Yay, you made it to the end of the Love Who You Are podcast. If you liked this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, or text a friend and share the love. These small actions make a big difference in this realm, and we thank you. And we have a present for you, a guide to creating and sustaining a home practice. In this free video, 7 experienced wellness leaders share what it takes to overcome the struggle of creating a home practice in anything: yoga, meditation, journaling, or whatever you'd love to do more of. You don't want to miss the wisdom of these incredible women. You'll find your free gift at devatree.com. That's DEVATREE.com. We'll see you next time, and know that you are loved.